Kinetic art is probably a good way of describing what I do. I prefer the term automata.
When we think of automata, we think of, I think in this case, something that a viewer is beginning or starting or setting into motion, where you turn a crank and doors will open and something absolutely magical and extraordinary will be occurring inside.
Automata were used as toys, they were used in religious ceremonies, and also to give an understanding of technological development and processes. Well, definitely it's kinetic. It means with movement. In order for you to truly appreciate his work, you have to participate.
I absolutely have no mechanical engineering background. All these things I've had to learn mostly through trial and error. That's been one of the most fun parts of the journey, to teach myself those aspects of what I do. It makes me wish that back in high school and college I'd paid a little more attention in math class when determining gearing and other mechanical aspects. My studio is really kind of a small-scale woodworking shop. If I'm going to carve a figure, I generally will draw a side view and maybe a front view, and then I'll make paper templates. I can trace those then on a block of wood, and I'll go to the bandsaw and cut out both profiles, a front view and a side view. This is just a rough sketch of the figure I'm going to use as the balance figure. I'll add a little metal rod through her foot, actually on up into her leg a ways. And that'll fit in a depression in this wooden sphere that turns. At somewhere in the lower leg, I'll have to tap in with some metal rods or wooden dowels that have counterweights at each end, and that will keep the figure suspended and balanced. Okay, I've got the template traced on the wood, and I'm going to make kind of a rough cut on the bandsaw. Now the figure's starting to take some three-dimensional qualities with both profiles cut, a side view and a top view. The reason the figure is headless is I can cut that separately and add it on. Of course, it's one-legged because I'm going to have the second leg be in an extreme angle so that the figure can balance.
He had started doing some carving, which he had taken up at the University of Kentucky when he was a student there. And at that point, he was starting to animate some things, and it was clear it was all trial and error. This was something that he was teaching himself out of curiosity and interest, but he was sort of seasoning it less with history and more with his own kind of vision, if you will, or his own sort of dark humor is a word that I've heard describe his work several times. I think just singular humor is the way I like to think of it.
Jack discovered me on my porch making some rudimentary automata back in the early 90s and introduced my work to a number of people. About that same time, I got to know Heike Pickett. She saw my work and kind of flipped out and encouraged me, and we've had an artist-mentor, art dealer relationship ever since.
I went to a studio and I was absolutely blown away by the work that he was doing. So I offered him a show, a one-person show, immediately. And that is kind of unusual because, as the artist can tell you, it's pretty difficult and I'm pretty picky. He had his first one-person show in 1993. And we've been working together ever since.
The care, the precision, the accuracy of his craft is supreme. That comes first. And, whether they were moving or not, sculptures, they're just gorgeous to look at.
I've been blessed to have a wonderful family. My dad was a fighter pilot in the Air Force for almost 30 years.
So they traveled around quite a bit. And so while he was born in Texas, he had family here in Kentucky. His father was actually stationed in Japan for a while, so many of Steve's formative years actually were abroad. And what an absolute exciting experience that must have been for a child in their formative years. Japan is absolutely overflowing with artwork in your daily life.
I'm a musician. I play just about any instrument that has strings, guitar and banjo and mandolin. From age 10, I remember going almost every weekend to antique shops and auctions. I think we were living in upstate New York then, and it was a great area for antiques. So I've developed a lifelong love of antiques. The things that I saw as I was growing up were whirligigs and mechanical toys and things that have movement. I even took apart my own toys trying to discover how they worked. There's some labor-intensive work involved in most of the pieces, but it's also a labor of love for me. There's kind of a carpentry aspect to what I do. There's the fine carving, plotting out gears, refining with little rasp and sandpaper. I would say a typical piece, if I worked on one piece alone, probably would take me a week or two. One of the reasons I like to finish the figure down so far is because then this wonderful thing starts happening with the light, where the modeling of the figure becomes this kind of a graceful dance of light and shadow.
I see his themes coming from many sources. A lot of Kentucky folk art, Appalachia, Southern Baptist sort of origins, themes of daily life. And again, it's Steve's take on it and Steve's interpretation. And he does infuse it with wit, satire, and playfulness.
I think he was 46 when he decided that he was going to do art full time. His father had passed away at a fairly young age, and that reminded him of his own mortality, and he felt that he better get on with what he was planning to do with his life.
Early pieces, a lot of them were about death, and I remember that he had lost his dad not too many years before that, and one of the things that had motivated Steve was that he knew that time was limited, and I think a lot of these pieces speak to that.
Well, we've got all the pieces cut and ready to assemble. We'll do kind of a dry run, make sure everything fits and the mechanism works properly. We'll start here with the base. Putting these pieces together is generally like putting together a Chinese puzzle. You need 3 arms usually. Well, that was not as bad as I thought. Hopefully everything just snaps into place. Well, that's going to work nice and smooth, it looks like. I'm just having to hold this mechanism in place. But I'm surprised it's actually working first time. This part can be a little tricky. I've pre-drilled some holes in the leg of the figure that will hold the weights.